Hello, this is Krista with Darnerfly ASMR. And in this video, I thought we could take a look at this book I found at the library. It's called The Age of Wood. It's got this beautiful illustration of a ship on the cover. It's written by Roland Enos. At the top here it says, "Our most useful material and the construction of civilization." There's a quote from the Wall Street Journal at the top that says, "Enos takes a fresh look at the familiar substance, wielding it like a wedge to pry open our past, examine our present, and even glimpse our future." This is a fairly recent book. It was published in 2020. The table of contents includes Part 1, Wood and Human Evolution. Part 2, Building Civilization. Part 3, Wood in the Industrial Era. And Part 4, Facing the Consequences. Humans have made astonishing progress since our ancestors came down from the trees. But how did the descendants of small primates manage to walk upright, become top predators, and populate the world? How were humans able to develop civilizations and produce a global economy? Now, in the Age of Wood, Roland Enos shows for the first time that the key to our success has been our relationship with wood. Roland Enos is a visiting professor of biological sciences at the University of Hull. He is the author of textbooks on plants, biomechanics, and statistics, and his popular book, Trees, which was published by London's Natural History Museum. He is an enthusiast for natural history, archaeology, and early music, and lives with his partner and several hundred ferns near Hull in East Yorkshire, England. marked off a couple of sections that looked interesting when I flipped through earlier. This is from the prologue. All these discoveries tied in with my happy memories of visits I had made from childhood onward to a wide range of wood-related attractions. Local archaeological museums with their rows of axe heads and reconstructions of the life of early man, Scandinavian open-air museums filled with wooden farmhouses, watermills, windmills, and stave churches, Viking longboats, the roofs of Gothic churches and cathedrals, medieval barns and castles, and Palladian country houses. It became clear to me that wood has actually played a central role in our history. It is the one material that has provided continuity in our long evolutionary and cultural story, from apes moving about the forest through spear-throwing hunter-gatherers and axe-wielding farmers to roof-building carpenters and paper-reading scholars. And knowing something about the properties of wood and the growth of trees, I started to work out why this was the case. The foundations of our relationship with wood lie in its remarkable properties. As an all-round structural material, it is unmatched. It is lighter than water, yet weight for weight is as stiff, strong, and tough as steel, and can resist both being stretched and compressed. It is easy to shape, as it readily splits along the grain, and is soft enough to carve, especially when green. It can be found in pieces large enough to hold up houses, yet can be cut up into tools as small as a toothpick. It can last for centuries if it is kept permanently dry or wet, yet it can also be burned to keep us warm, to cook our food, and drive a wide range of industrial processes. With all these advantages, the central role of wood in the human story was not just explicable, but inevitable. So it is time to reassess the role of wood. This book is a new interpretation of our evolution, prehistory, and history, based on our relationship with this most versatile material. I hope to show that looking at the world in this fresh wood-centered way, what an academic might call lignocentric, can help us make far more sense of who we are, where we have come from, and where we are going. building a civilization. This chapter here is called Clearing the Forest. If there is one symbol of the Neolithic period, the time when humans first made a major impact on the environment by starting to farm the land, it is the polished stone axe. Indeed, a major recent account of the Neolithic in Europe was called the Tale of the Axe. You can see polished axe heads in local museums around the world, and if you get a chance to handle one, then take it. Beautifully smoothed and rounded by grinding and polishing, they weigh heavily in the hand, into which they fit snugly. The expanded blade end tapers to a smooth, if not sharp edge, while the back curves into a blunt dome. We now know what these axe heads were used for, but when they first started to be dug up and came to the attention of antiquarians, people had no idea what they were. This should not surprise us. After all, they don't look much like heads of modern axes, which are far narrower with far sharper blades. In fact, it does not look as if they would be much use for cutting at all. The farmers who found them buried in their fields called them thunderbolts, imagining that they had been thrown down to the ground by some deity during storms. Interesting. There's a section here with some illustrations and photographs. Here's a spear that's 450,000 years old. It's the world's earliest known wooden artifact. Wow, these are fascinating. This photograph of the world's earliest surviving wheel and axle. 5,200 years old. This is a reconstructed Bronze Age boat. Wow. And pictured here is the prow of the early 9th century Osberg ship from the Viking Museum in Oslo. Let's see if I can show off a few of these things. Beautiful. Let's see. Here's some churches and barns, a town hall. Maybe I'll read out this caption down here of this beautiful ship. HMS Victory, here seen at the Portsmouth Historic Dockyard, England, was the ultimate wooden warship and Nelson's flagship at the 1805 Battle of Trafalgar. The huge masts are made from the trunks of American white pine trees and the hull from oak beams and planks. The complex rigging was controlled with the help of large numbers of wooden blocks or pulleys. There's the tall ship there, or the warship. Here's a Windsor chair. And then a balloon-framed house being built in the western United States in 1877. This is fascinating. Here's a train on the trestle TVRR bridge at the head of Fox Gulch, Alaska, 1916. To bridge canyons, Americans preferred to build trestle bridges over stone viaducts or earthen embankments. They were made by joining logs together with wrought iron bolts to build a complex, braced structure. The funnel-shaped smokestack of the train shows it was burning wood, not coal. Wow. Very cool. This chapter is called Wood in the 19th Century. For a period during which industry and science had been expanding so dramatically, and which had seen the rise of great European empires and the American and French revolutions, the events of the 18th century had surprisingly little effect on the infrastructure. Modern moviegoers are often hard-pressed to spot the differences in the backdrops of films set early in the century, The Favorite, or Gulliver's Travels, for instance, Amadeus or Pride and Prejudice from the end, and for good reason. The buildings, designed in the neoclassical style, were much the same in proportion and all built on the same human scale. Even the new factories built at the end of the 18th century were of modest size, just a few stories high, and from the outside they looked just like the warehouses that had been built at the century's start. People still traveled around towns and across the country in horse-drawn wooden carriages, and around the world in wooden ships. The main differences that could give viewers a clue to the period were seen indoors. The change in furniture, from heavy oak to elegant mahogany, the increase in the amount of china and other ornaments on display, and the change in fashions from delicate silk dresses to simpler European cotton gowns. The reason for this apparent paradox was that even though the British had broken free from the energy constraints imposed by using firewood and charcoal, their technology and engineering was still limited by its reliance on timber. The time needed to grow and fell trees, cut and season timber, and to ultimately shape it into useful products limited productivity, while the engineering disadvantages of wood limited the size and strength of the structures into which it could be made. As we have seen, timber is prone to splitting, difficult to join, vulnerable to warping and rotting in the open air, and flammable. Carriages were heavy and uncomfortable, and wooden ships remained small, cramped, and leaky, and this conspired to limit travel. At the end of the 18th century, it still took 3 to 4 days to travel the 400 miles from London to Edinburgh. Sailing times barely improved either. It took Benjamin Franklin some 7 weeks to travel across the Atlantic on his first sailing in 1724. His last voyage in 1786 took exactly the same time. Meanwhile, bridges with a span of more than 100 feet were rare. Buildings were limited to 6 stories in height and covered spaces to 80 feet in width, and the wooden machinery that filled the mills was heavy, crude, and clumsy. I'll have to keep reading to see what changed in the 19th century. Looks like the end here, and then we have acknowledgements and lots of notes and references. This seems like a very well-researched book. It's one that I'm excited to read, cover